Good morning and welcome to Mayor's Weekly. We're pleased to have you with us today. There's a hint of spring in the air, and I certainly welcome that, and I suspect most everybody does. That I'm ready for winter to move along and get to the pretty days of spring. And today, joining me is, and all of you know, Kathy Chambliss, our city clerk, chief financial officer, and we have done this before, but it's important enough that we need to do it periodically, and let's talk about how we manage the finances of the city. And because if you don't get that right, nothing much else can be right. Wouldn't you agree, Kathy?
Yes, sir.
And what prompts this, we're just a few days away from being at the midpoint fiscal year 2023. Time just flies, doesn't it? Not
It really does.
The fiscal year starts on the first day of October and ends on September 30. And what happens at midterm, we'll talk a little bit about that, and then back up and talk about some of the fundamentals of financial management within the framework of this municipality. Kathy, at mid-term, of course, we look at our finances every day. But at midterm, we kind of take a pause. We reach out to our department heads and ask them to come in, and we do a review of their department, how they're progressing against budget, and we have a very, very good system that Kathy has put together. We can see how our departments are progressing against their budget, if there's reasons for concern, or they're going to be special needs in the second half of the fiscal year. So it's a really good exercise, and it's a good exercise for managing the finances of the city. It's a good exercise for our department heads, and they're looking at their budget. But to pause and take a look at it broad scope is something that we think is very beneficial. Don't you agree, Kathy?
Well, it is, and we've seen the results of that. You know, not only are we looking at the departmental expenses, and we do a deep dive into maybe why a line item might be over. Our departments are generally always within their budget, and we've seen that year after year. So they do a super job with managing their expenses. But, you know, I'm also going to look at revenue, and I do a deep dive into each revenue line item just to make sure that we're getting what we're supposed to be getting and that it's reaching a budget as well.
Kathy, you're correct. In the time I've been, our department heads have operated within their budget. What's exciting to me is in recent times they've had budgets large enough to do the things they need to do.
It's very important,
Yeah.
and to buy equipment that they need.
Being broke and staying within budget's not a good thing. Is it?
Doesn't help a lot.
It doesn't help a lot, does it? But but Kathy, let's we back up and to call your attention to the size of the operation of this city. Probably approaching a $35 million budget. That's a lot of money. I don't care where you're at. Over 200 employees. I don't know how many vehicles. There's so much it has to be looked after. And Kathy, I know probably late July, certainly early August of every year, you begin to think about the budget for the upcoming fiscal year, and you've done this long enough, and the data that you gather and the system that you've built, you have a pretty good sense of how the year is going to wind up, and kind of gives you a head start on that budgeting process, does it not?
It does, and you know, we do a lot of trending, but like you say, we're looking at it every day. So, you know, when you're looking at it every day, you feel pretty confident about how you're going to end and maybe where to start another year.
Right. Then, you know, Another thing that's so important to remember is a penny should not be spent, and in our situation is not spent, without the funding body's approval, and that being the council, because the council is the only authority to appropriate money. Isn't that right, Kathy? The mayor, whether it be me or somebody else, whatever, I couldn't just decide to go out here and take on a project and spend the money. The council has to approve the money before it's spent.
Yes, sir, and you know, sometimes I feel like people get tired of hearing budget amendments.
We're going to talk about that in just a minute. We're going to talk
Right.
about, that's where I'm going. The word amendment can have good and bad connotations. If I'm out farming and I'm doing soil amendments, that's a good thing. It's making the soil better. If I'm down here amending the budget, then that could have bad connotation. And you look at personal finance, and you hear people say, "I blew my budget." Well, more times than not, that's a bad thing. It may be a lack of personal discipline. But the mere fact that we do a budget amendment in the running of this city is probably 99.9% of the time not a bad thing.
No, because it's appropriating money for equipment oftentimes that, you know, we may have set aside $500,000 to purchase equipment for the year, which is something we have the money and we can do that now. But we will ask the council, we want them to know what they're buying with that $500,000.
Well, Kathy, we start the new fiscal year with a budget, and I think maybe this year we'll just say 34 million. And then as the year goes along, that number changes, driven by budget amendment. Now, a budget amendment relates to the budget in its entirety, but it works its way down to the impacted department. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's right. Now, and we'll just use a simple example. It happened just a few days, not picking on a department. Our cemetery, Oak Hill Cemetery. You know, those folks work with Kathy and they bring their budget together, what they think they're going to need in the upcoming year. Well, they had a situation there. The mowers that they use to mow the cemetery, very expensive mowers. Well, the engine failed on one of those mowers. Well, you know, they've got to have a mower to mow the grass. That was not budgeted for, to buy that mower. So the department head comes to Kathy, comes to the mayor, and explains the problem, what their needs are. Then we take that to the council with an explanation. They approve it. You do a budget amendment, and Kathy, if I get this wrong, you know, I don't mind being corrected. But what happens is the cemetery's budget grew by the cost of that mower, didn't it? And what that does, if you didn't do that, we've read about budget amendments in the paper, and at times, and I'm of the opinion, and you being a certified public accountant, I think you hold the same opinion, the timeliness of budget amendments is important.
Well, it is. You should get them in before you spend that money because that's your authorization to spend the money.
Well, if you elected not to do that budget amendment, you really don't know where that department's at, do you?
Oh, and that as well, absolutely.
You know, so you lose the control mechanism you have for managing the finances of the city. Now, if you did that broad scale, and let's go back to a $5 million budget, 200 employees and whatever, and if we just kind of turned our head, then and we did these things, we spent money in the course of a year, what we know, a lot of money, that the funding authority has not approved.
Exactly.
And so um, when we talk about bringing these department heads in, Kathy, and and their budget may get amended several times through the year, but you can take a very, very clear and make an accurate review of where they're at in their budget, because it would be unfair if you didn't make that budget amendment, brought that cemetery department head in and looked at their budget and said, you're all out of whack or whatever. That wouldn't be fair to that department
No,
head, would it not?
No, sir.
You know, you amend the budget to do that. But now, another thing that Kathy, I heard this saying, you know where I come from, lots of good sayings that's come, but this related to a Canadian manufacturer. I read this years ago, and they were touting the quality of their product. And I bought one of them. Turned out to be one of the sorriest things ever owned. But what they said was the truth. They said the last nail affects the first board. Now, what that tells me, if you don't keep your eye on the ball, you can mess up everything you've done leading up to it. Does that make sense?
It makes perfectly
Makes
good sense.
The last nail affects the first board. What we do in running this city, Kathy, and we won't put it, if you ever want to look at it, you can come here, you can. Kathy prepares a management report that's distributed to the mayor and to the council, and it's comparative in nature, looking at where we were at last year as opposed to this year, a running account of how our revenues are growing, declining, and then one of the things that is real interesting that Kathy includes in the management report is we don't look at the line item, but how is sales tax revenues growing in the state versus our city? That's a pretty good indication. You know, you look across Alabama, you have large metropolitan areas, you have rural areas, whatever. But and I know in the last few years we've been as good or done a little better than the state of Alabama, and that's if you're doing better than the state as a whole, I think that is worthy of noting that we things are going good for our city. And but this report, I encourage our council to read this report. It's one of those kind of documents that doesn't need to be a dust collector, and if you read and understand this report when we get it, then we know kind of how we're progressing. Now, Kathy, here we are at mid-year. We know that what we read in the financial news, that the economic forecast is concerning. The Federal Reserve just raised rates, I believe, for the 9th time, and indicated that they will continue in their battle against inflation, and the stock market's doing crazy stuff, and we've talked about this, that if the economy does go into a recession, Jasper seems to be slow to go in and slow to come out, and you don't have a crystal ball or whatever, but and then another thing I'd say, and I'm throwing a lot of stuff out here, Kathy, the revenue for the city does not come in 12 equal pieces. They're barbells, if you will, big lumps, and but your general thoughts of without digging into the numbers, how we've progressed the first 6 months of this year, and then your best call of where we might be at September 30. Not specific numbers.
Right. Well, right now, at the end of February, we've seen about a 5% growth in revenue.
Now let's talk right there, Kathy. That's 5% growth over last year.
Exactly.
Now, I've said this before, I think we won a national championship last year. So, growing revenue 5% is like adding something to a national championship. But now, I know what you're about to talk about, expenses, and we did something I'm so delighted we were able to do, may have been the largest expense budget item that you've ever put in place in your career where there was not a corresponding revenue source. Would that be fair? That being a raise for our people?
Oh,
Okay.
right, exactly. And so, and that gets us to that expense growth. We have had a 5% growth in expenses as well
Okay.
overall. So, and as you've alluded to, that
So as
part
we learned in the
review.
country schools that we attended, if you got a positive 5 and a negative 5, the result's 0.
Yeah, so, yeah. So that's not too bad when
No.
you think about such a large line item
Yeah.
adjustment that we did was pay increase to our employees.
But if we could perform somewhere close to the level we performed at last year, and that, would you say that could be possible?
I think that could be possible with what we're seeing if our growth in sales tax revenue continues. And like you
right.
say, our economy, the way it is, I first thought, towards the last couple of months, we saw a little bit of drop in that sales tax growth, but it picked back up last month.
Yeah.
So, it's just, right now, it's just hard to say, but looks good so far.
Well, Kathy, I don't hear this much anymore, but why do you want a lot of money in the bank? That takes some of the pain out of budgeting when you're facing big time economic uncertainty.
Right.
That's you can sit down and do that budget, and if we miss it, it won't be driven by us just making a mistake with a number. We'd miss it because of external forces, and that's being the economy. We can do nothing about that. But we've talked about this. If those kind of times come, and personally I think they are coming, and then the big question is, they come, what's the duration? But we're prepared to weather the storm. And Kathy, what I would think you'll agree with, and you've been here a long time, we have done more probably this year than has ever been done in the history of the city. Broad spectrum. You look at playgrounds, just City Hall project, and we'll meet this week to talk about the Sportsplex and learn more about that. And I can tell you, folks, it costs a lot of money to operate this city. And just a couple of weeks ago, Kathy did a very sizable budget amendment to buy a piece of equipment for our landfill operations. The Alabama Department of Environmental Management inspects our landfill. With a fire in this landfill east of here, I think it's up their scrutiny. What they told us that we were deficient in the equipment that we needed to run the landfill, and certainly I learned in my banking career, you don't turn a deaf ear to your regulators because they have tremendous authority. Well, we had to step to the plate and buy an expensive piece of equipment, brought on a budget amendment, but you didn't have to go to the bank and borrow any money, did you?
Did not.
Right. So that's kind of an overview of how we go about our finances. So important. Know where you're at every day. We never travel blind. We have our management report. We do our budget amendments timely, do them as necessitated rather than have an accumulation, because if you let them accumulate, you spent money that hadn't been approved by the funding source, and consequently, you really don't know where you're at financially.
That's exactly
and,
right.
You go in and start doing the budget, and then say, ooh, we've gone in the red. We know where we're at every month. And And I hope you appreciate that. That's the right thing to do. It's a smart thing to do. And if things were to turn south on us, we know it before they get too far down the road, don't we?
Yes, sir.
That's right. Kathy, anything you'd like to add?
No, sir. Just going to enjoy this day. It's nice outside, and
And unfortunately, we're right around the corner for tornado season, but maybe we'll that'll be a non-event for us this
I
year.
hope so.
Good, good. Pleased to have you with us today. If you have any questions about how we run the financial side of this city, we're always willing to talk with you, sit down with you, show you anything that you'd like to see and how we go about this. But the system is straightforward, it's solid, and in my opinion, and you would say I'm biased, but it serves the taxpayers of this city well. Look forward to being with you next week.